what is your name?
What's my first name?
Yeah, what's your name?
Of course, it's Frasier Ellis with an N in front.
An N.
And the N means nothing,
Nothing.
which is my father's first name.
How do you spell nothing?
N-U-T-T-I-N-G.
Okay. And when were you born, Fraser?
June 19th, 1930,
And where did you grow up?
on Topsail Road,
In St. John's.
in Boggy Hall.
Boggy Hall Street?
Boggy Hall, that's now where Village Mall is located, which used to be the farm of one Farrell family.
And you lived...
Farmers, we lived just east of them on Boggy Hall Road.
And how many children were in your family, Fraser?
4.
You the oldest?
Actually, there was 4, 5.
And you were the oldest or the youngest? Or...
I was the youngest.
And tell me about your siblings.
Tell me about my siblings.
How many siblings did you have? I mean, you had 4, so who was the oldest?
Margaret.
And what did Margaret... Was she sporty or musical or smart or shy or...
Margaret worked in finance in Ottawa in her later years. She was quite good at math, and she went to Littledale at around and did her grade 11 down there. She was from Carbonear, and she's my oldest sister.
What do you mean she was from Carbonear?
Pardon?
What do you mean she was from Carbonear?
That's where my mother was from.
Oh, your mother was from Carbonear.
Yes. And the story about my Aunt Margaret is very simple. I went to her funeral because the pictures I'll show you here of her holding me when I was a year old.
So she was your...
Yes, the eldest girl. So I went to Ottawa to her funeral, and I read a piece from a poem, Invictus. She was one of those people who...
Strong woman.
Pardon, a very strong woman in her time. She took no guff from anybody, man, woman or child. And I read this piece out on her, and...
What was your mom's name?
Mary.
Mary, and what was her maiden name before?
Davis.
Mary, and where was she from?
Carbonear.
So Carbonear.
Yeah.
And she moved into town?
She married my father about 1922.
And where was your father from town?
St. John's on Springdale Street.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you know how they met?
Pardon?
Do you know how they met?
Well, she worked, I think, in service, I think, down there in one of the homes of her
aunt.
One of her, yes, her aunt,
aunt
that's
from
right. Her
Carbonear.
father's sister had a kind of a boarding home here in St. John's, down on near Casey Street, down there somewhere.
Okay.
So she came in and worked for those. She may have had grade 10, I don't know, but you know, in those days that women only had to have enough to put a fish on the stage.
Yeah, and she met your dad and they got
Better
married.
than they married here, yeah.
And then they had 5 kids.
They had 5 kids. They had 5 kids. My mother had 4 kids by my father.
Oh.
My oldest sister
Was from another
came
relationship.
to my house
Came to your house.
when I was born, and she was my Aunt Marg.
That's sweet.
Isn't that something?
That is sweet. So she was
and when
raised
she
by
was-
your grandparents.
When she was buried, she lived with her parents. When she was buried in Ottawa,
90 years old.
and and my cousin was down, her brother's boy was down from Boston, and we went to the funeral. And I read out that she was my aunt, my mother. She was a lot of things because she was really literally raised me, you know. And when we finished, we got in the car, and he said to me, "You called her Aunt Marg." He said, "Did you know she's your sister?"
And you couldn't believe it.
I couldn't believe it. None of my 3 younger sisters would believe me when I told them.
No, not one of them.
None of them. They said, "That's wrong. It can't be right. Impossible."
Not impossible.
I said, "No." No, I said, I thought it was impossible too, but I said, mothers have children sometimes before they're wedded.
Yes, that happened.
And I said, this happened to my mother.
That's right.
And the result was that her father, being a Methodist, very, very paternalistic, very powerful, he very poorly treated my mother because of that, which I found out in later years. People were cruel in those days, beyond belief.
Yeah, still a little bit cruel.
Pardon?
Still can be cruel. People can still be
yeah,
cruel.
but But Aunt Margaret was wonderful.
Yeah, and she went and worked in finance.
Yeah, she went into the Canadian Navy in 1940 and
Okay.
became
In
petty
the
officer,
Wrens.
I think, in the Wrens.
Right.
Yeah,
Very good.
yes, and she married a British commander of a destroyer here in St. John's.
And they moved to Ottawa.
They moved to Ottawa.
Did she stay there till she died? Yes.
She stayed there till she died, but he died before.
And did they have children?
They had one daughter who lives up there now.
So, that's pretty
And,
good.
oh my, this is something again. When he died, my oldest sister opened up he had a great big secretary there. And she couldn't believe what she read in the secretary. Her husband had had a wife and 4 children in London, England.
And she never knew.
They were all of them were professionals. One was a professor of math in Kingston, another one was in Regina in Saskatchewan. And we never learned this till about 15 years ago.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. I said, you know, you're in a checkered life, Linda. I said, you know, your mother.
Yes.
And she was absolutely, that was something again.
Did she ever meet them?
Did she what?
Go to meet them?
We did. My cousin and I went
Did
to
you?
visit him, yes. And the relationship is, needless to say, was strained,
Yeah,
to
that's
say
fine.
the least.
But it's very
But
interesting.
she had a lot of equipment that he wore in the Navy because he was a midshipman, went right up to the top
Yeah.
in the British Navy. And so we gave it all to the sons, you know.
That's very cool.
That was another experience with my older sister. So.
And then your next sister, who to
Ruth
you? Ruth.
married a Canadian, and she went to in the RCAF and went to Calberta and lived.
Okay.
And my father had, you know, he had health problems with his lungs, asthma and so forth. And in those days there was very little treatment for asthma. And father would have been in his mid-40s. 1944 when the war ended, and my brother-in-law from Alberta said, why don't you move out to Calgary, sell this place. It's dry out in Alberta, and you'll probably get better health, which he did.
It really helped him out.
Yeah, well, we went out to Alberta in 1946, I did grade 10 and 11, 9, 10, 11 out there.
Did you?
And father, you know, stayed there, bought some property, but mother didn't like it. Her friends were all here.
Yeah.
So she wanted to return to Newfoundland, which we did in 1947.
I'm glad you
So
came
we're only
back.
there 2 to 3 years, you know.
Yeah.
And so we came back, and actually, since my father had sold that old property, or let me put it this way, he had carried a mortgage on it, so he took it back, and we went back into the same old home where
No,
we were
very
in
good.
for 15 years, and we stayed there for another, from 1946 till my father died in 56.
He must have been a young man.
He was 61,
That's pretty young.
and but he was, you know, I was just looking at the pictures a little while ago, like a lot of people his age. He was a very athletic man, excellent soccer player. He should have really been in the local Hall of Fame, but he never pushed his own name in. But
Yeah.
he raised a lot of money for athletes that went on to go to British games everywhere, and was a fast runner. And but when he quit sport, he put on weight,
Yeah. That happens
which is
a lot.
brutal.
Yeah. And
Went
it's
up to-
hard on your body.
Went up to 250, 260 pounds, which I tell my son now, make sure,
You don't go that high.
keep your eye on the old waist.
And was your dad tall like you?
No, he was only 5'8".
Okay.
5'8".
Well, where'd you get your height?
Good question. I'd say where I got my height is where he didn't get his height. He was orphaned at 2 years old. His father died when he was 44 years old. And he left 3 boys on the floor and a pregnant wife. 5. There's 5. 5 boys. No girls. My father was 2 years old, and my grandmother was pregnant with the 5th child.
Wow.
So in 1894, that wasn't easy.
No. Oh, so he
But
was.
fortunately, he was his father's, my grandmother, I suppose, or great grandmother. She was related to the Frasier family. I'm sure your mother would know Dr. Innes Fraser. He was at St. Clair's. He was a surgeon there. He would have been my father's first cousin.
So is that why you got your name Fraser?
That's the reason I got my name. And as I told his sons years ago, I said it was a good thing that my father was related to them, because I'm sure they were helped out.
Oh,
At
absolutely.
a time when they had a widowed mother,
Yeah, and 5 kids.
5 kids, nothing to help them, so.
And how did he die? Did he just die? Or?
Who's that?
Your
Grandfather working on the railway when they
Oh,
were building the railway in 1894.
Wow.
Yeah, he had narcolepsy. I'm absolutely convinced of it, which my grandson now, Eamon, has the same thing, and my father had it not as serious as
As your
his
grandfather.
father, but narcolepsy is a terrible affliction,
Yeah.
and it's probably caused by asthma and other things like that,
Yep.
Anyway, my father, when the war came, the 3 brothers went off overseas. One went in the British Navy, another one in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and my father went up to Scotland. I said 3 of them. Yeah, 3. So, because he had rickets,
Right.
which is very natural for anybody born in 1894, considering the amount of food you get,
Yeah.
and
Low vitamin D, right?
no vitamin anything.
Yeah.
So. But they all came back from the First World War.
Oh, that's handy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My Uncle Jack was in the fish business down on the south side. He had a J.C. Ellis and Company. He had a good fish business there for years, And Bert was worked with the government. My father was worked with Browning Harvey as a sales rep for
Did he?
1934 up to 1945.
And just selling
And then-
Pepsi and stuff around the coast.
Well, he introduced Pepsi. Would you believe it? In 1940.
They first brought it in here.
Well, there was a man by the name of it's not Epstein, but he came down from New York when the Americans opened the base at Pepperell,
Right.
and he went and saw Reg Harvey, who was the owner of Harvey, Browning Harvey at the time, and he said to Mr. Harvey, "We need a bottler here for our new product. We're offering 10 ounces of Pepsi Cola for 7 cents, and Coca-Cola will give you 5 ounces for the same price."
Yeah.
There was going to be 2,000 people building bases here.
Yeah.
He had all the figures. He said there's going to be tons of this stuff, and we got to find a bottler. And he couldn't find anybody in St. John's would take it, and he ended up coming back to Browning Harvey, and he finally convinced Browning Harvey to bottle Pepsi. Needless to say, what have they got today? Pepsi only.
Yeah.
All their chocolates are gone, their candies are gone, their jams are gone, da-da-dum, it's all gone.
They used to sell all that stuff.
They sold all sorts of bakers. They had bakers there from England, from Huntley and Palmer, a big British business company.
Yeah.
There was a man there, and he had the recipe for making, those cookies with the stuff between them and everything,
Jams and
Yeah, they used to sell that because there was duties on all other stuff coming in, so
Right.
Newfoundland had protection, right?
right.
But all that went, and Pepsi ended up, the only sidelight of that is when my father went to Alberta, the fellow who got his job married the boss's daughter,
Ooh.
Susan Patton,
Oh, I see.
and the 2 Patton boys now run Pepsi,
Pepsi. Of
and they
course.
do a good job by all accounts,
Yes.
quite well off, thank you. And so that was his life, and we're into the 40s.
And then
My sister married an American from the base.
which sister
2
was that?
sisters
Yeah,
married.
my older sister married the Canadian in Alberta. My sister Catherine, who's about 6 years younger than me, older than me, I should say, she married an American from California, and he was a flyer in the Second World War. So she went all over the world with him, when the Korean War was on and all that sort of thing. And my younger sister also married a fellow she worked with at Pepperell.
And what was her name?
Pardon?
What was her name? Your
Yvonne.
Yvonne. So it's
Yvonne,
Yvonne, Catherine, Ruth, Margaret, and nothing Fraser.
That's me. And yeah,
That's right.
so Yvonne, I was talking to her only a couple of weeks ago, but she's got
the only one left.
she's got a bit of dementia. She's a very personable girl, but she had flat now,
Yeah.
and I understand that's part and parcel of that.
Yeah.
You could
She's
tell
dead,
there was no
very sad.
feeling of any kind.
And where is she living?
She's living in outside of Seattle
Okay.
in Washington State
And she's
Yeah.
got kids
with
there
her
as well,
daughter.
or
Yeah, she had a daughter and a son, and there was some problems in her family. And the boy, I think,
Not her family, his.
family, yeah, he
Yes.
committed suicide. I think
So it's just her daughter left.
it's just her daughter. She's in her 60s now, and she's living there.
Looking after her mom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
my
nice.
other sister Catherine, she had 3 children. 3?
4.
4. Okay. And they're all all out in Honolulu out there. They married
Oh yeah.
married
to Hawaii.
Hawaiians.
Yeah.
One Hawaiian, one girl's a policeman.
Oh
She's
yeah.
retired. I think she's a police sergeant now and is retiring shortly. And
Lawyer.
the other girl's a lawyer in Denver.
Very good.
Yeah.
So they've
And
all
a
done well
forestry,
for
and
themselves.
the other girls
Oh yeah, yeah.
working in
All the
forestry.
girls did, and they just sold their house there now, and everything is wound up because they had a lovely old house in Colorado Springs overlooking Pikes Peak. You know,
Yeah.
it's a lovely spot, Colorado. It's cool.
Yeah.
You know,
So where did you go to school besides Alberta? You went
at Prince of Wales on the Marchand Road, Holloway School,
right?
Holloway School, then Prince of Wales.
And how did you get all the way over there from Baggy Hill?
Walked.
That's a trek.
Walked is 1.5 miles. It's roughly 2 miles,
Each way every day.
just 2 miles from our house on Thompson Road to the Newfoundland Hotel. It's roughly, roughly 3 miles.
3
That's
miles.
right.
Yeah.
So it's just it's about 2 miles to Prince of Wales. So
Okay.
if I didn't walk, I bummed a ride in on the old Golden Arrow coaches they had in those
They
days.
still had them then.
Yeah. So that was good. I didn't mind the walking, you know.
Did you do well in school?
Mediocre.
You weren't great.
Pardon?
You weren't great.
No, far from great. But mentally, I would be considered, as I can remember being riddled by the principal one time, "You're a lazy boy.
Really?
You don't work hard. You should be doing more.
Were you
Spend
good
more
at
time
sports?
working at the books."
Were you better at sports or?
Mediocre at sports, I would think, yeah.
What about music?
My good friend Gordon Breen excelled beyond me
Oh yes.
considerably, which we used to play a bit of sport together, but Gordon was faster on his feet.
Faster at everything.
He was good, very good.
And what about music? Did you do any music stuff?
Yeah, not very much.
No, you weren't
No, we
interested
had
in
pianos in the house and we had violins in the house, and since we all went to
Littledale.
the Littledale
Oh,
Convent
your
School,
sisters.
my father had a piano and we had, the girls all had violins because the nuns taught violin, right? So when we left Littledale, the nuns inherited 3 violins, not a piano, but 3 violins went down there.
That's great.
And years after, you know, I was singing with the Anchorman Chorus, and we went in there because a lot of the sisters in there liked the kind of music we were singing. And one of the boys, Gordon Kelly, said, "Why don't you come in? The nuns would like to have us in there." And at that time, the sisters were beginning to disrobe themselves from the regalia of the old nunneries. And they were all there with skirts and lipsticks, the whole thing, and I couldn't believe my eyes. And I said, "I went here 1938. And I said, "I remember well." I said, "Sister Annie O'Leary, she was a lovely person. And she was a kindergarten teacher in grade 1, I think both of them." And I said, I always remember her very fondly.
That's nice.
And I said, "She's still?" "Oh yeah, she's in the building." I said, "Well, can I go and see her?" "Oh, I'm sorry. She's not in any state to be seen." I said, "Oh, that's too bad." She's subsequently passed on, but I think she was in dementia then.
Yeah.
Sister Annie O'Leary, I think was her name. But it was good. You know, I went to Littledale, and in that area, Corpus Christi Parish, all my friends were either the Breens went to Holy Cross, and the O'Neills went down to the school down near Littledale. What was it called, the boys' school down there? I only went to
St.
grade
Joseph's?
St. Joseph's.
Yeah.
Why would you remember that?
Tim's family went there.
Did they?
Yeah, well, they all grew up in Kilbride.
St. Joseph's, yes, indeed.
Never
There
St.
were all
Joseph's,
boys
I
there.
remember.
It was an all-boys school. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
a girls' school there too, but I can't
Girls
remember the
went
girl's name.
Now, the only reason I went to Littledale is I had 3 sisters, and I don't think they wanted me to go down to St. Joseph's because I'd probably get pounded out of me. So I went to Littledale, and John Nolan, the radio announcer with NTV, was there.
There was 5 or 6 of you
John Murphy,
boys went to Littledale. Oh, yeah.
John Murphy, Paul Murphy, they were the Murphys of
They all went with him to Littledale.
the Avalon Telephone Company.
Oh, okay. But mostly it was a girls' school.
Oh, it was a girls' school.
And you didn't mind, you didn't get a hard time.
No. Everything was quite normal. The one thing I remembered is I went to every once in a while they'd have religious lessons, and my father said to me, "Now, whatever you do down there, whatever they do, you do. If the bishop comes in and you got to walk up, you walk up," which I did. Archbishop Roach, because he had played soccer, I think, against Archbishop Roach, and knew him well. He lived right across the road in Beaconsfield. And every time he went by, he said, "Remember now, when he goes by and puts his finger up, you do the same." And he was always going back and forth, on tops of the road, in that big Pierce Arrow car.
Yep.
And Tom Neville was his chauffeur, and they were neighbours of mine. They worked at Beaconsfield. All the Neville family had jobs as farmers over in Beaconsfield with the bishop, or chauffeurs, or
A lot of people work for the bishop.
yeah, and that's right. And they worked at St Clair's, different jobs. The Neville family.
Then when you finished school, you went through Littledale, then Prince of Wales, and
Yeah,
and
and
finished
then I went to Memorial in 1949 in
Did
the
you?
class of 49. I wanted to do veterinary medicine, really,
But-
because I always liked dogs and still do, and
Yeah.
and I thought it would be great. So my father and I went and saw 2 or 3 veterinarians around town. One guy was a mainland fellow from Ottawa, and he said, "Why would you want to do veterinary medicine? We're all drunks." And he was drunk then.
Yeah.
But we're all drunks, he said. And he said, "It's an awful job." And he went on, and I said, "Well, I like animals." Dr. So-and-so, I forget his name now. My father was there laughing his head off. And then I went to another veterinarian, he said the same thing. "Why would you want to get into that?" He said, "Look, if you deliver a cow," he said,
Yeah.
"you got to wear a robe from the top of your head down to here. You end up being red, and it takes hours to get yourself clean when you're finished. You get a breech birth with a calf.
Yeah.
You'll be all day and all night and all of this, you see." Anyway, I did pre-med or pre-veterinary medicine. There was another guy with me actually, going to do the same thing.
And they
And
didn't dissuade
There
you.
was only three places you could go: Cornell University in New York, McDonald College, McGill University, and in Ontario. What's the name of the place, the town? Anyway, outside of Toronto. I can't-
Cambridge. Was it
No.
Cambridge? No.
Not Cambridge, but regardless. And anyway, it would have cost considerable money, and at that time my father was starting to get heart disease bad, and he was working again in a different job, but he was still selling, And he said, "Don't worry about the money, we'll look after that." But I went to Memorial anyway, and I flunked English the first time in my life.
Good.
And I
Tell me why
went
you
to
flunked
I
English.
skipped class one time with Dr. A.C. Hunter, and the next day there was about 200 in the class.
Oh.
"Mr. Ellis, nobody leaves my class without permission. Never." 48, 49. I said, and that was it. When the year was up, I said, "Father, no, forget it." I said, for me to raise money and for you to raise money and for me to have flunked English, forget it. I said, "The university is not going to be for me till I change my ways
Yeah.
considerably." As Roberta used to say,
Yeah.
"Dad, you give them what they want."
Yeah.
I said, "That wasn't the way I operated, Roberta. Unfortunately, it costs you if you don't do exactly as you're told." So anyway, Pepperell opened up in 1950,
Oh, perfect timing.
which was perfect timing. And I just noticed in the paper today, a young man died by the name of Mike Spearns,
Yeah.
84. And I hired Mike right out of either
High school.
what's the school?
Brother Rice.
Brother Rice, yeah.
And
He and what's his name, Tull, 2 boys right out of school, and they were good workers, boy. And they, just clerical work they could learn on the job.
and what were you doing at Pepperell?
Well, I went in as a clerk.
Okay.
When you remember, now we're hiring 2,000 people. Pepperell was going to be responsible for the Northeast Air Command defenses of North America from bombers from Russia, which was a very, very dangerous period in history. The Russians were very powerful, very aggressive, and they used to fly over Greenland right down to Grand Banks. And they were within range of New York, really. And they had atomic weapons. And the Americans were quite petrified that Stalin, if he ever cut loose, they had a huge air force. And they had to come up here, so they got an arrangement with the Canadians, because Confederation had come to reopen all the bases and build up radar sites. So they were hiring people. Thousands of soldiers came in. There was at least 1,500 military people that I was working for, supplying these people with everything they needed, from food and clothing to radar sets and everything else, and that was my job.
You were like the quartermaster kind of
guy. Now, they put up a building, and we started to hire people by the dozens. Mike Spearns was one of them, and Tolkien. 18 or 20 girls banging on typewriters day and night, you know. No mechanical equipment in those days, so I had a good job.
And how did you get that job? Did you know someone, or did you just walk in off the street?
No, the only person I knew, the only person I knew was my brother-in-law, and he didn't have any pull or anything down there. He might have, for all I know, but you know.
Yeah.
In those days, they used to say the only way you can get in and out of Pepper is be a Catholic.
Frasier, that's not true.
No, it's not, I know.
So,
but everybody in personnel was, just about anyway.
So how old were you then when you started?
19.
19. And you stayed there how many years?
Till it closed.
How long?
1958.
So 8 years.
60.
Yeah, the Russians went up with Sputnik in 1956.
Yeah.
1960.
I think they sent a monkey up in orbit. And then the next year they sent another thing in orbit, and the major I was working for at the time came in and he said, the Russians now, we know, have rockets.
Yeah.
And we don't have any.
Yeah.
We're in worse danger now than we were ever before, and the base is useless. So we're going to close every one of them down. That was 1958. So the last couple of years they cut out one thing, and I went to work in a different department where I met my wife, who worked with me in the same office.
Really?
Yes.
She was working.
Henrietta worked in the same place that I worked, and she worked for somebody else, and I had different people, but we were essentially in the same
department,
same building, same part of the building, different offices, you know. So that was about 1957, 56, 7, 8, something like that.
Do you remember the first time you asked her out?
Yeah, March 1958.
And what did you ask her?
First date we had.
No. No. It was March 1959.
Okay,
And we were
so it's
and
19?
the 19th of March.
29, I should say. 19.
1959.
29.
And where did you take her?
Signal Hill.
Good. Proper thing.
Yeah.
You had a car.
Oh, I had a car. The day I went to work at Pepperell, I got a car.
What kind of car did you buy?
Pardon?
What kind of car
A
did you buy?
Hillman Minx.
Nice.
I used to call it the Hillman Stinks.
Why is that?
Because it was a British car, and the British, I still don't know how they ever got an aircraft off the ground. Because the electronics in the cars were so bad. If you got a rainstorm of any kind, you couldn't get it started. The electronics got shorted out, and you know, all sorts of things.
Of course, Newfoundland, well known for its lack of rain.
Yeah, and so I had a Hillman, and then I had an Austin, and I had a Morris, because there were cheaper cars. You could get one of these things for under 2,000, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what I got. And at that time, I could bend my body and get into them because they're only small.
So when you left Pepperell, where did you start working?
Well, one of my friends at in Prince of Wales, Doug Piercy, who was a classmate of mine, he decided he was going to do pharmacy, and which is the old-fashioned way of getting into pharmacy, and you learn at nights.
Yeah.
And he became a pharmacist. And a couple of times I was in visit, you know, just chatting with him at about the time the base was still open, 1958 or 59. Well, just after it closed down.
60.
Doug was telling me, you know, there's a lot of drug companies now looking for people, you know,
Yeah.
looking for sales reps. They want to start business in Newfoundland, you know. So I was in there one day and there was a guy there, a manager from a company from Germany. We're looking for somebody to start out.
Perfect.
And this was a German company coming here. You know, now you're talking about not too long after the war ended.
No.
A lot of the German companies were on their knees, and this particular company had developed a new drug for diabetes, and they wanted to start it in North America. You know, it was sulfonamides, which are still used, not for true diabetes, but for secondary overweight people. You
Yeah.
know, that sort of thing. So I got in with them, and I went to work with them. And
Did you stay with them till
I
you
stayed with them
retired?
for no, I moved on to another company for
Okay.
improvement, sort of more products and that sort of thing. So I ended up working with Wyeth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wyeth.
Then
And how long did
I-
you stay with Wyeth?
No, I went with Wyeth for 2 years, and then I went with Pfizer,
Oh, okay.
and I worked with them for. Did I have 25 years in with Pfizer? I think I did.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
And how old were you when you retired?
65.
exactly.
And did you enjoy your job?
Yes.
Why
was
did you
very-
like it?
Very pleasant. As a matter of fact, I can remember going over to St. Clair's Hospital, and there was always a good place to have you could open up your bags. And I can remember there was a couple of people used to go by and never stop. And I believe one of them was a lady by the name of Mary Kiley. Because I remembered her after. I said, I can remember that lady. But I don't think she ever stopped to say goodbye, adios.
She's shy, I heard.
Pardon?
I heard she was a shy woman.
Who knows?
Who knows?
But I know one person who was not shy and was extremely outgoing. Is Sister Power. What was her name?
Lucy Power.
Sister Lucy.
Sister Lucy.
Yeah, she was very ebullient, very outgoing. You know, and of course they were all. It was a good place then. Great, St. Clair's and so forth.
And
But it was a good job.
And
Good
did
job
you-
at the time. Now it's all changed.
It's probably still a pretty good job.
You have to be far more professional today than you did in that time.
Yeah,
I would not get the job today without a BS degree
right.
or more. Definitely.
Bachelor of Science. for
Yeah,
sure.
you definitely do. Because Nancy does that work today. My middle girl Nancy, out in BC for the new drugs that cost literally thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah,
And the companies have to go to the patients to make sure that they don't, because the drugs are far more toxic,
yeah,
far more potent,
yeah.
and they have to be watched closely. So
Yeah.
it's a different game today.
So you were working at selling drugs.
Yeah.
You were doing pharmaceutical repping,
Yeah,
and you were married to Henrietta,
that's right.
and you were living on Elizabeth Avenue all the time, or did
We
you
were
live somewhere
living
else?
in, well, interestingly enough, excuse me, before my father passed away, he knew he was getting sicker and sicker, you know, and I remember he said to me one time in the back garden, he said, you know, I'm pretty bad. And he said, your mother there's nobody here, you know, all my girls are gone.
Yeah.
And he said, you got to look after my mother, your mother. And at that time we had the big house there, you know, and I was still single, you know, and I said, well, I'll do my best, Skipper, you know. I'll carry on.
And this was over on Boggy Hill.
So needless to say, when I married, my mother was in there and I said, now look, I'll be either going to get a house or I'm going to come in here. It's a huge place.
Yeah.
So I landed my dear wife in there on Topsail Road, which is a no-no for anybody with a sensible mind. Which I did. Anyway, she looked after my mother for 12 years because she had a stroke.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but that was,
But we were there longer than 12 years. But, you know, we were there for a couple of years and then I bought a house and
Yeah.
then my mother had a stroke.
Yeah.
So But
We all lived
well, all my
in
kids
March,
were raised on Thompson Road and over on Elizabeth Avenue because we finally sold the place for an
Okay.
apartment building, you know, because there was a couple of 3 acres there,
Yeah.
2.34, you know,
It's a nice
and the
piece.
city had moved in on us and their taxes were going to the roof.
Yeah.
Had to get out, you
Yeah.
know. Not unlike where we are now on Elizabeth Avenue. Too much land, not enough, not much time to look after it,
Right.
and age and all the rest of it, you
Well,
know.
that's what happens.
So we were out there, and that's where the kids were raised, and up there on Elizabeth Avenue, you know.
Very good.
And they all, when we moved to Elizabeth Avenue, was great because all they had to do to go to university, and
Yes, perfect.
Roberta and Nancy both went. I don't know. Did Donald go for a year?
Pardon?
Did Don go for a year?
Year and a half.
Did he?
Yeah.
I got him into the School of Music, as I do down Cook.
Yes. Then he went to Montreal,
And then,
and then Bill C101 came in,
he went
which meant all the music lessons in Montreal had to be in French. So he was caught halfway through the course.
He knew
French.
French. He just couldn't get a job because
Yeah.
it wasn't his first language.
Yeah.
But he knew
But
French.
that's all right, because then he came home and got.
Well, he went to Toronto and got a lot of practical experience there, you know.
Yeah.
And
Toronto. We didn't hear much.
came back here and.
No, we didn't.
And what did Roberta do?
Well, Roberta wanted to do something or other, and at that time it was about 1960. She was married, so put ahead of into the 70s. And I used to follow the oil business, and I was telling Roberta, I said, you know, there's potential here for huge oil reserves. I said, if you're going to go to university, for God's sake, do geology.
Yeah.
I said, I really think that you'll do well if you get into geology, because I said there's going to be a lot of work done on this,
Yeah.
which she did. And Roberta, when she got through, they just started to do drilling off Nova Scotia, and she went and applied for a job and was the first woman hired to work offshore.
Great. And didn't bother you.
Anywhere in Canada, I might add.
And you weren't worried.
I never worried one whit. She used to fly out in an aircraft, and they didn't have women's clothing that fitted her. They didn't have anything on board the Sedco 709 for a woman to live. When she went out, and the first time she went out, the captain, he said, "What have we got here?" And everybody looked and said, "This is a woman. She's trained in checking the oil, the chemicals in the oil stuff, you know." Good God. And he said, and Roberta, being the type Roberta is, the first thing she said to him when she met the captain, she said, "I want one thing to tell you, Captain. I'm not going down below deck where all these
84
men are.
men.
If they want to go downstairs and go in and out of the cabins, they don't need a woman downstairs and having to be different."
Yeah.
She said, "Please get me out of there anywhere but where." So there was a little room next to his place on board the boat, and they rigged it up, and that's where she was.
Great.
And there's only
2 years.
recently I met a
3
woman who
years.
worked offshore, and I said, "So very many women working offshore?" She said, "About every second person."
Yeah, about 50-50.
I said, "Isn't that something?" I said, I told her that my daughter had done that, you know,
Yeah.
how times have changed. Because Roberta didn't like it after a while because it was, you know, she met John Hayes, and he was a geologist too. And so she switched over and went into working in the bank.
Yeah.
And went to Goose Bay and John went into the mining game up there,
Yeah.
and that's when they had a daughter in Goose Bay, and
Now they moved away.
then moved back to Halifax, and John did commerce, and then they moved to Ontario, you know, raised a family up there, and that's where they are today, you know. And Nancy, of course, is a nurse. She did 13 years with the cancer group over there. What do you call
Your
it?
daughter Nancy?
Working with Dr. Hong, for
Yes.
instance, yeah.
Yeah.
In the, what did they call that? What do they call cancer
Center?
treatment?
Oh, oncology.
Oncology, that's correct.
Yeah.
So she worked over there for years.
13.
13, yeah. And interestingly enough, the fellow I go down to Young's service station down there, and where they do a lot of garage work and motor work and everything. There's a young man down there, and his sister worked with Nancy, and she was about, I don't know, might have been 33 years old, and was working with Nancy as a nurse. Wasn't working with her, she was in her class, and she came in to see her, and she had terminal cancer with 2 small children. And Nancy came home completely devastated. And she said to her mother, I can't work there anymore.
No.
She said,
done.
this is the final thing for me. She gave her chemotherapy up to the end, you know. But the girl died at 38, 40, 2 small children. And she said, I got to get out of there. So she went to work in geriatrics where somebody told her people don't die of cancer, they die of old age.
Yeah. Not really true, but true enough.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But at that age, young like that girl did.
Yeah, that would be.
That got her out of that pretty quickly.
It would.
You know.
It would. And
Yeah.
she lives in Vancouver now.
She's there now, yeah, and
Yeah.
still there, yeah.
And then you have Don, and he's got 3 children.
3 children, 2 by Sheila O'Leary, and 1 by sister
Jill. And Maren and Eamon seem to be doing very well for themselves these days.
Yes, well, you know, Maren is all right. She's pretty well settled away, but Eamon's got his problems, you know.
He'll figure it out.
We hope so. We
Gotta
hope
get
so.
back to school. That's his problem.
Yeah, he's got to get his life straightened out that way.
He will.
She's cool.
He's only young.
Pardon?
He's only young.
Yeah, there's a lot of things can happen when you're 23, isn't
Yeah,
there?
it's a lot of things can happen when you're 23.
So how much time have we burned up?
We've burned about 40 minutes, and now I'm going to get you to get up, and I'm going to talk to Henrietta.
Certainly.
What about?
Just about where you
time.
grew up and stuff
You're
like that.
joking.
She's going to refute all the lies